Okay, so I'm going to share what I'm up to with the 4.0 UI. Let me just go full screen. So I think last time I shared the designs with you, there was two concepts. There was one on the right here that was kind of like our dream concept of doing all these new ideas and new features and like doing inline editing and natural language for our forms, and then new layouts. And then the other idea was just applying Material UI to our existing layout, which didn't really work as well as what I'd hoped it had worked. So we're kind of now meeting in between, and I'm going to show you where we're at. But just to recap on some of the things that we're focusing on with the UI as we're designing, the first one is just reducing the cognitive load for the users, so helping them to focus on the task. We felt like the UI was getting quite overloaded with things, so we're kind of wanting to kind of strip them back and help the user focus a little bit more. The other thing is just to make room for growth and new features. So scaling the navigation, we're running out of space across the top, so we've kind of moved it so we can add more things there, and looking at the layout as well, so we can do these new features and updates for like the environments page, for the variable editor, and for the deployment process as well. And then also just update the look and make things more consistent. So looking at our layouts and our patterns and our components as well. So that's just some of the things that we're focusing on. So this would be the dashboard. And as you can see at the top here, this is an updated navigation or a nav bar. This stuff in here is just a screenshot, so don't worry about that part too much. You can see that we're accommodating for spaces. We've collapsed our main navigation into a hamburger menu. And we still have our octopus as well, which goes to the dashboard page. So if you clicked on the hamburger menu, it would bring up something like this. Again, reinforcing which space you're in. And now we have plenty of space for more navigation if we need, once we start growing a little bit more. And also putting some of this help menu down the bottom with the version number as well. So if we would go into the projects page, this kind of page layout would be a structure for all our first level navigation pages. So things like tenants, environments, and library and configuration. So this would all look the same. So we would have our primary action area up here, a new feature that may not happen straight away in 4.0 when we release it, but maybe later on down the track, would be this contextual help feature. And then if we clicked on a project, we're seeing that we're not really changing the layout too much. We're just updating it a little bit. So we've applied this new kind of sheet to help focus the user on the content. And it also gives us area to actually bring in the actions for that particular space, so that so it doesn't feel disjointed. It's kind of all related, all the content's related in that one area. The other thing we didn't want to lose with the UI is the ability to jump between projects really quickly, because we had that drop-down menu in the top level nav. So we're incorporating it here in this page banner. So when you click on it, you'll get a drop-down that has a quick search, and you can see all your projects, and you can filter that way. The other thing we're looking at is some scrolling techniques. So this kind of is trying to solve the problem of keeping, so like save buttons at the top all the time, especially with, if we've got a long form or there's lots of content, like say on the deployment process page, there's lots of steps. It gives us the ability to keep primary actions up the top of the page. So with material design, it works, you know, you can't just move something without knocking another object out of place. It kind of, you get elevation, so your one piece will elevate and get a drop shadow while the other piece moves underneath it. So this is kind of what's happening here. And so the same would happen with the deployment process page, where if there's lots of steps, the user can scroll. The add step button would always be at the top. There'll also be an overflow menu as well. So for this one, it might be the reordering of the steps would be in the overflow button, in the overflow menu, sorry. This page hasn't actually been finalized yet. I'm still looking at some of the designs and how to actually show the nesting of the rolling deployment steps. But if we go into add a step, the layout would kind of be the same. And the idea is that that white material would actually disappear and become the card. So the white piece of material kind of shows an element, is the idea. So you can select, say, deploy an IIS website, and you would go into the bigger piece of material, drilling into the detail to configure the step. For a form example on the settings page, this is the idea that we have at the moment of reducing the cognitive load for forms. So summarizing what's been selected. So material have this thing called expanding panels. And within those expanding panels, you can actually put forms or more information. So if you expanded it, you can see the options that you have, and you can also get an information for help, pretty much. So all of those little bits of help text would go into that information panel, wherever we put it. We haven't really decided where that's going to go yet. And then you can expand and collapse, make the changes to the form, and save as we normally would now. Again, this would have an overflow menu. So in this menu, there would be the delete, the clone, possibly the change the logo function. Unsure about that yet, but as you can see, it's consistent. Everything's kind of in that top right-hand corner for that section. So then if we were to look at the library section, we would come to, again, another set of cards that would be the menu for this high-level section. And you can drill into these, and we would have some sort of summary of information. So you might say, okay, well, you got 50 step templates. So we might break it down and say you've got 10 community step templates and 40 step templates or custom step templates in that section. So if you were to go into there, we would use this material sheet to show each section. And then if you were to drill into a step, everything that's related to that step or to that element would be contained within there. So this is where we would introduce our tab menus and any sort of functions that you can do for that particular element. So that's kind of where we're at the moment. If you wanted to provide any feedback, please do. But if you wanted to have a look at any of the designs or the components that we're putting together, I've started a login for Zeppelin. It's just like one login that everybody can access through Octopus deployed through the DevOps email. And that's within our KeyPass file. And you can come in and you can see where we're at and how all the components fit together. Yeah, and feel free to comment on here as well if you've got any ideas. You can, there's a comment around here somewhere. you can add a note and make a comment as well. So that's it. So any questions or feedback on any of the designs?
Yeah, Jess, the biggest piece of feedback we probably get in Team Scale for the UI design is just that certain pages need to handle large amounts of data.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I guess I've promised a number of customers now that I'd at least pass on their feedback that they feel that some pages should work differently depending on how many items are on the page. So I don't know whether that's something you've thought about.
It is something, yeah, we're keeping in mind. Once we start drilling into putting content on the page, we'll look at those pages that have the capacity for lots of content. One of the things we've spoken about is possibly toggling two different views. So if a user does have lots of content, they can toggle for a view that suits them, that caters lots of detail.
Yeah, like some people have said, the cards view works great for a small amount of data, but once you've got a large number, it'd be nice to be able to switch to a table layout.
Yep. Yep, and that's something, Paul and I have definitely discussed, and we're keen on to do that.
Lovely.
Cool.
Jess, I just had a quick question about the process screen. Can you jump back to that slide for a sec?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm just curious about the positioning of the add step there. It's only a little thing, but in the way it scrolls, does the life cycles panel move with the list, or does it stay stationary, or how does that piece going to work?
If it's to be consistent with the other pages, it would move with the list. Some of the discussions around this page is that maybe this might move.
Right.
So that it just becomes a deployment process.
Yeah, I just think that when you said the add step is relative to the page, it is, but it's only the things on the left there, not the life cycle. So I was just curious how that might work. Cool.
Yeah, no, it's definitely something that I was thinking about when I was putting this together. But also I'm conscious of trying to keep things as the same as possible. So if we were to follow the idea of we want to put our actions with the relevant content, then the add step would need to kind of move over here, and maybe there's two separate material sheets that sit within this page. Yeah,
cool. Okay, thanks.
That's okay. Nothing else? Cool. I think Henrik's next.
Yes. So I will be giving a quick overview of how we tend to do our UI testing for 4.0 so that we don't introduce any unexpected UI changes, because currently we don't do any kind of UI testing other than the limited amount of tests that we do in Team City, but we don't actually test the UI components as such. So in React, because we're now moving to React, Facebook created a test platform pretty much called Jest, which allows you to do lots of, it's similar to Chai and Mocha, but they basically just incorporated those two into the one big platform, or they call it framework. So the main part that we're thinking about using and that I've been investigating over the last week or so is snapshot testing, which basically renders your component and then takes a snapshot of it. It just writes out the JSON representation of your DOM, and then the next time you run your test, it will compare the rendered component to what that snapshot is. And if it's changed, it will tell you that it has changed, and then you can determine if you've introduced an unexpected change or not. And if you haven't, you can update your snapshot for the next time. So the snapshots will be committed to source control, and just so that we have that record, obviously. So a Jest test looks like this. So if you've done any sort of Chai or JavaScript testing, this should probably look pretty familiar to you. At least if you've done Chai, I know, because it looks pretty much exactly the same. It has the same methods and things like that. So we use Enzyme, which is a tool to actually do some certain rendering. So we used a shallow rendering, which only renders the main component. So if you have subcomponents in that component, it won't actually render them out fully. It'll just render the actual tag that is in your component that you're testing. So so this is basically, we describe our test. So this test scenario is for the project card component. And then we define our test and what it should do. So here we do a shallow copy of the project card with a fake, with just a test project. And then we convert that to JSON and compare it to our snapshot. The first time you run this test, it just would generate the snapshot and put it in a subfolder. So basically what that looks like is just a file of text that has an exports, which is the test it's currently running, and what the expected output of that component is. So if we do, so I use VS Code, which has a Jest extension that has a Jest runner that we can run, and if I can find my so we can, it prints out, and obviously I haven't made any changes. So let's make a change to our project card, say project name, exclamation mark. Now this test should fail because we now changed the component, so it doesn't actually match the snapshot that we have here. So here we are expecting it to say project 1, but the output actually tells us that it's got an extra character in it, the exclamation mark that we just added. So at least this way we will have to make a decision if we have made a change to the component and the way it renders itself, if that is what we wanted or if it's an unexpected change. This obviously, the way that we're composing our components, it could be that you're making a change to a component that you use somewhere else in your UI, and that we might not expect to make a breaking change in that area, and this should surface that for us, so you can make an educated guess if you wanted that to happen or not. To update a snapshot after you made a change to the UI, you can do npm test, which basically just runs the Jest CLI, and here it's obviously said that it's failed, and it tells you that to update it, you just need to run npm test dash u. The dash is basically in npm how you pass arguments to the tool that you're calling in your script, and that will now update the snapshot, and it's now passing again. So that's all well and good, but so there is another tool that you can actually use called WallabyJS, which is continuous test integration in your IDEs. So it's available for both Rydstrom and VS Code. So I don't have a license. It's a paid for tool because it's very powerful. So let's just, and when we run that, it should give me some pretty colors. This error here is something I need to investigate. It's actually failing on one of our test classes. I'm not sure why. It works fine just running the Jest CLI, and Wallaby is just not happy about something, so I need to investigate why that is. But it actually gives you nice green icons in the UI, so that, and because it keeps on running when you while you're coding, you can go back and you can save that, and that'll rerun the tests, and it will tell us that it failed. So we go back to full snapshots. This error isn't particularly helpful because it doesn't actually show you everything that you need to see, but you can go to the output console of your chosen IDE, and it will actually show you what the change is. And yeah, so that's pretty much what we are proposing, I guess, to use for our UI tests in the front-end world, just to make it a little bit less likely for us to introduce any sort of breaking UI changes that are unexpected. That's pretty much all I had. Any questions? No questions. Excellent. I think Mark is next. Mark Rydstrom.
Okay. So I've been looking at just how we're going to do forms mainly. And so I've got a couple of just super simple forms. One just done in kind of straight React using local form state. And then the other one hooking the form into Redux. And that's a decision we're still kind of thinking about. You know, Redux gives you some benefits, but whether we need it for just a simple form or whether we hold it for things which have kind of more complex interactions. So I'll show you just a simple form to start with. So we get, you know, validation and all that sort of stuff. And that's all easy enough. One of the nice things you get that we've hooked up is hot reloading, obviously. So I noticed just before on this one that my select here doesn't have a label, and that I noticed just before I started here was because I had used label instead of this floating label text, which is a material UI thing for some components we're using. So if I update that and hit save, my form reloads and I get my label. So that's nice. But because the form reloads, I would have lost any state I had. So if I'd kind of partially entered that, if I toggle this back to label and save again, you know, we've lost the state of the form we're in. And so when I get to Redux, you'll see one of the advantages there. That said, one of the advantages I'm definitely finding with just doing everything with the local form state is a lot less magic going on. Yeah, I'm not really a front-end guy necessarily, and I've found React super easy to pick up. Like, you know, compared to Angular, where I've been having to try and figure out how I'm handing data into child components and remembering all the little symbols around when stuff's binding in. You know, like you just write some JavaScript, super, super easy. And even if you're not using Redux, there's some nice, there is some nice debug stuff. So there's a React plugin here. So in Chrome, so it's just a Chrome plugin. So if I find my my form in the stack, it'll show me on the side here my current state. So that can be, you know, super easy. I don't know if you can see that. It's probably pretty small. Updating. So, you know, if you had, say, probably regret trying to do this. So if say my my handle change function wasn't updating my state, if I hot reload that, you know, so now when I try and enter things, nothing's working. And if we come back into our, you know, kind of React thing here, you'd be able to see that, oh, my state's not updating, you know, why is that happening? And you can also, obviously with all this stuff, you can just attach the WebStorm debugger, stick a breakpoint in, and you can even stick breakpoints down in your render function. So you can see, you know, whack a breakpoint in render and go, oh, my state's not what I expect it to be. So I've found that in this, when you're using straight up React, super easy to find problems. Whereas again, in Angular land, it's like, I don't know where I put a breakpoint to see why that binding isn't working. You know, there's just a bit more just digging around, trying to, you know, look at your code, you know, without kind of too many tools there to help you out. Anyway, so that's just simple form. You know, relatively easy to hook up async loading and submission and that sort of thing. We'd have to, you know, a little bit verbose, but a lot of that is just kind of boilerplate we'd be able to write helpers for. Going into Redux land, it's going to look, hey, surprisingly the same. The only difference here is every time there's a form change, that change is going through the whole Redux container. So on the code side, it's not there's more code. Like we're using a Redux form library that does kind of all the boilerplate around getting through Redux for you. So that's great. And it automatically gives you things like dirty state and being able to reset to a pristine state and things like that. Nice library. There's definitely more magic going on. And I found it a bit tougher if something wasn't quite working right to get to the bottom of it. But that's obviously just also learning the library and learning Redux and things like that. Like I said, we're still tossing up whether for a simple form you need Redux, or we're kind of leaning more towards just holding it for where state's required outside of that component, or for more complex interactions. But then one of the nice things that does give you is because your because your state is stored in the container. If you do hot reloading, you maintain your state. So if I edit that text there, I get a hot reload, but all my existing state has changed, but I have my new value here. So again, a small form like this, no big deal. But if you've got a big form where you've got to set up a lot of data and then you want to edit and have a hot reload, piping everything through to Redux means all that state's still there once it reloads. And then the other thing that's that can be nice, although whether it's useful or whether it's a party trick, you know, it's again, we're still trying to decide, but you get this again, another plugin for Chrome that will show you as the kind of Redux events filter through, you get the history of them, and you can filter out some of those events, or you can like rewind your state. So as I go backwards through the state, you can see the kind of things I've done to the form unwinding. And you can also save that state down and send it to someone. So I can export the state my form was in as a JSON blob, send it over to someone else, or potentially we could even do that in prod as part of our, pulling a bug report. Hey, drop out your form state, and they could send it to us, and we'd get the state of the form plus all the history, which, you can certainly see where that would be nice outside of just the developer experience it gives you. Anyway, so that's kind of what we're playing with at the moment and where we're at. Don't know if anyone has any questions or if I've missed anything there. Okay, I think Pawel's next.
Cool. So what I want to talk about is quite a few topics. So I'll try to keep it high level as much as possible. If you have any questions, just pop into Frontend Refactor or Slack channel and we can talk about that later. But let's start with navigation. So if you remember navigation in Angular, it's imperative. You make a call to transition to a new page. In React, the most friendly and the best solutions are based on React components. So even navigation itself, if you, let's say, I'll show you content component, the navigation itself is expressed as components. So that means you can have it, you don't have to have it centralized the way we have it in the old portal. You can have it anywhere. If you want to navigate somewhere, then let's go to login internal. Then if you want to show the content of the login page, you return this piece of markup. But when you want to redirect from it, because the authentication succeeded, you return a redirect component. So when you look at that, kind of initially, it looks weird. But then when you read the reasoning behind it, makes sense. React components, they come with lifecycle methods, and that's what the React router components use to move you between pages. And another thing that we get with React router, and because they're components, is that the routes can be easily nested. So you can, that gives you components that are isolated and independent. You can move them in the hierarchy as much as you want, and they should still work. I'm just talking about this. This work was done by Rob Perez, who is enjoying his time in the US, but that great work is from him. The next part is data management. So in React, we have 3 different ways of managing data. The simplest way, when you think about React components, they're basically functions. They get input data and then return output, which in our case happens to be markup. So the first example of that will be search layout. So if we go to search layout, we create a UI. It's a basic loop map in this case, and we pass data directly to project card component. The project card component doesn't interact with the external world, doesn't perform any UI. All the data it needs, it gets it from its parent. And that's the simplest way of passing data. As you can imagine, this can get pretty tiring pretty quickly when you have to pass data through a hierarchy that's deep. With ES6, you can use a spread operator to help with that. But this way of passing data works very nicely when you have a well-defined relationship between parent and child. The next way is something similar to an Angular controller in our current application. It's a component that is, that's not this one. This one. It's a component which is self-contained. What does it mean? It retrieves the data it needs. So the lifecycle methods I mentioned before, so this is component did mount, render, and component will mount, component will unmount. I think there are 4 or 5 of them, maybe more. Usually, the only one that we care about is the render, unless we need to retrieve data and do something specific. But in the component did mount, we can retrieve data for this component, set the state, and then the component displays itself, the data itself. The data, it's not shared. If we have 2 components on the same page and they display the same data, but they retrieve it in an independent way, they might be displaying inconsistent state because it depends on when they retrieve the data the last time. But if it's a self-contained thing, it doesn't share anything, we can do that. It's easy. There's no problem. And the last part is Redux. So this is something that Mark mentioned before. Redux is a bit complicated concept, but the idea is you would use it when you have shared state. And an example of a shared state in our application is authenticated flag. Once the user is authenticated, many parts of the application want to know about it and display data based on the value of that flag. How would we manage the shared state? Well, first of all, it's all based on events. So let's go to one of our components that is using Redux. It's a simple. I'll show you how it looks like. Okay. Oops. Wrong page. 1 second. Okay, so it's a very simple page where we can add, where we keep a list of people. I'm adding a new person, and there's a bit of a lag there, so we indicate a network call. Very simple form. Now, when you look at WebStorm, the way this is handled is when you type your text and you're ready to add a new person, you click on a button and that fires on add person event handler. That event handler calls to Redux. And what it does, it dispatches an action. That action is called add person. In the action, you would communicate with the external world. So perform IO. So make an HTTP call, add that person to your database, and then when you get the result back, you will notify the application itself that it needs to change the state, and that change is made by a concept or class called reducer. So in our case, when we get person added event, we simply add a new item to an existing list. Then that list gets sent to the directory component. And you can see we have the directory and directory internal. Why do we have that? We want to keep our main component as agnostic as possible. It doesn't know about Redux anything. It gets the data via props. Now, but we need to connect that component with Redux, and for that we need what in Redux lingo is called a container component. So it's like a wrapper that is a glue between Redux and our component. We have a certain, we came up with a naming convention because we have 2 components that technically speaking should have the same name, but the component that we expose to the external world, the component that we want you developers or us to use will have a proper name, and then the implementation, we call it internal. If you have a better name, please let us know. We're kind of happy with it, but not entirely. So these are basically the three different ways of passing data directly. I can have a self-contained component that retrieves the data on its own, and then a component, a Redux component that gets the data from a Redux store. As you can see, the Redux components, they have they come with a bit of complexity, but they give you that time machine that Mark showed before. At the moment, we're leaning towards starting with self-contained components and then migrate them to Redux components when there's shared state, when there's a very good reason. The good thing is we can migrate at any time, and more than likely this is going to be a completely transparent change for the rest of the application. As long as we keep the names correctly, we should be able to migrate the component from a regular component or self-contained component to a Redux component. And the last thing I want to talk about regarding data management is async and await. So things that we know from C#, they very nicely work. I think this is ES7 feature. It's stage 3 of the standardization process, but it works perfect. Obviously, in the proof of concept, we don't make any network calls, but we just have a set timeout. But there's no need to have promises, callbacks. All works the same way as in C#. So that's really, really nice. Next section, styling. Now, styling is one of our biggest problem in the current portal because it's global. It's not isolated. A change in one place can break things in completely other place. So our goal was to keep styles as independent as possible. At this stage, there are two main solutions that people are pushing for. It's either CSS modules, So what is a CSS module? CSS module, it's just a regular CSS file which we import as an object to our application. And then we expose the styles, the names of the styles via this object. So where is the class name here? You have a class name and it's styles.projectCard. So it feels pretty simple. And why would we do this? Well, we're going to do that because if we go to projects, you will see that the styles have a bit different names. So part of the class name is the name that we gave it, but then it has a hash or part of a hash in it. And the whole idea is to make all the styles isolated. So they're only for this component and they will be unique in the whole application. So if you change them, you're not going to affect anything else except your component. And because that's happening, we can keep the names really simple and the structure really flat. We don't have to have really long nesting. We don't have to have a top-level identifier to ensure the isolation. Another concept that is getting popular, but it's not yet, let's put it, mainstream in JavaScript. It's a difficult concept, but it's not yet widely adopted. It's called styled components. And to give you an example, if we use a CSS module, that's how our kind of solution looks like. Our styles live in a separate file. Now, with style components, the styles are embedded inside of your component. And the class name becomes a component. And the idea behind this solution is that if styles are independent, isolated, and they're used only in one place, so there's no point of having those classes in a separate file because they're not shared. So we can inline them. And that's basically what's happening here. And the person who came up with CSS modules, Glenn Madden, is the person that came up with style components. So it's like an evolution of his thinking about CSS and how to keep it isolated and how to make it more powerful. Because as you can see here, the styles can be dynamic. They can be based on props. At this stage, we're leaning towards CSS modules. There are two reasons. First of all, it still feels like CSS, less is available, Sass is available. We don't have to change the tooling we're using much. At the same time, style components, they still have some performance problems because some of the styles are dynamic. So unless the whole application is loaded, nothing can be seen. You need to run JavaScript to get the styles. So it's not yet a solution that's well baked and mature. That being said, again, as with Redux components, there's a clear migration path. Once the styles are isolated, we can move them to a different form. We can always basically copy them from a LS file, paste them here, and we can use style components. So that's not a problem. There is a path towards possibly a better solution. That's the way it looks like right now. From the styling, another interesting thing from the styling perspective, we're trying to say bye-bye to IE9 and IE10. So we'll be supporting IE11 plus. We haven't heard anything from our customers yet. We shipped a warning for IE9 and IE10 customers in 3.13. And we are trying to use rem as a unit of measurement instead of pixels. Why? Rems are based on font size. So when you scale or zoom in, zoom out, the whole interface changes in the same way. So it's all proportional. We use pixels when two elements needs to be close to each other, no matter what the zoom level is. But this kind of very high level comparison. When it comes to TypeScript, this is something that is still on our list to do properly, but we are already using it in a few places. You can see the React stateless component. It takes project card props, which is a generic argument. So then when you write your component, you get props dot, and you get project, because that's part of the contract, and children, because this is a React component. So that's a property that is always available to you. So it's not everywhere. We're adding it as we go, but we still have a card to go and try to apply it to as many places as possible, because it helps. Part of TypeScript comes TS-lint, introduced by Rob Perez in a very strict way. So what did that make sure that your code is consistent? So this is configured in such a way that if you miss a space between attribute and value, you will get an error. And when I save it, Webpack will tell me that, no, there's something you need to fix. So that's a missing space, I think. Yeah, missing white space. I need to add a white space. So initially, this felt like a bit getting in the way, but it actually makes the code base much, much, much better. So it's a really nice tool. And a few other random changes that we're introducing because we are using kind of the latest technology. We have something. One of the problems that we have in the current portal is that it's one massive JavaScript or two massive JavaScripts. So what we did for the proof of concept, we externalized React to a separate chunk. That's still downloaded up front, but at least now we have more files and the browser can download them in parallel. But another thing we can do is load modules or JavaScript on demand. And how does it work? I will show you. So we're loading manifest, React vendor main, that's all as expected. Now when I log in, you will see that we're loading, because we're navigating to the project tab, we're loading projects module, and we're loading the whole area, but we are loading it only when the user navigates to projects. And so we can have one for environments, one for tenants, libraries, settings, however we want to structure it. And this is possible because, again, the new JavaScript comes with dynamic imports or asynchronous imports. At the moment, we're using the old syntax system that import. It will just be import in the future, but TypeScript doesn't implement it yet. Again, the dynamic import is at the stage 3 of the standardization process, so it should be approved very soon, and then will be supported by browsers and TypeScript. Obviously, Microsoft, I can imagine, is waiting for the final approval, the stamp. But we give it a path, and it says, well, okay, I'll import everything that's under Areas projects components when you ask for it. And the way it's implemented, it's again as a React component. So when we ask for this whole area, we will get a promise of a component, and when we pass it to the React router that will resolve it, only when it will be mounted and rendered, then it will be retrieved from the server. So in this way, the initial bundle that we send to the client can be much smaller. Another thing when it comes to debugging, so Mark showed you, so in the DevTools, we can put breakpoints, not only in JavaScript, which we would expect to be able to do, but we can actually put breakpoints in our markup. So if I reload and then log in, I get the breakpoint here, and I can examine props and what their values are. So it doesn't have to be JavaScript. It can be just the markup or components, which technically speaking are JavaScript, but it doesn't have to be plain JavaScript for the breakpoints to work. Another thing is, so we have a live instance of our proof of concept. You can go there and play with it if you want. But there's a very nice plugin that shows us all the dependencies and sizes of them. So we can keep an eye on the size of the JavaScript we're pushing to the client. One of the surprises for me was that the moment.js gzipped is nearly 100K. We don't include it or import it ourselves, so it must be some other library, but it's good to know about that and see whether we can do something about that. The Redux form is it's 28K, so that's not much. The whole React module is 80K. So that's React, React DOM, React Router, Redux. So all of that, it's 80K. So that's not much. React itself is 9K. It gives you a really nice overview in terms of where the size of your overall bundle goes. So as you can see, the client-side development matured a lot in the recent worlds. It's been pretty stable, and it's a proper development environment. I was surprised how things now work together, especially with Webpack 2. It's really nice. What's left for us? We need to make sure the perf works properly. Maybe I will just show our Trello board so we can have a look. We need to make sure the permissions work. A few bits and pieces in the navigation, but that's more around the new UI concepts, proper implementation of TypeScript. Yes, 667, I think we're using it as we go. Maybe we'll try Yarn. We want to make sure that our authentication extensions work still with React. Possibly they won't, because I think they're based on Angular, so we'll have to come up with a different solution. Ideally, that it's not framework specific. Maybe we can express the contract that extension needs to implement just using pure JavaScript. So then in the future, we can migrate to something else in a couple of years if we want it, and we won't have to change them. But so it all looks good. It's all coming together nicely, and hopefully we'll start implementing some parts of the portal soon.